Welcome to the Rabbi and the Shrink. This is Dr. Margarita Guri, CSP, The Shrink, and this is everyone's favorite rabbi,
Yonason Goldson.
And we're delighted to have with us Nick Gallo. Hi, Nick Gallo.
Hey, how's it going? So glad to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, we're delighted, and we can thank the rabbi for finding you. He's a good talent scout, I have to say.
Yes, he is. Yes.
So you have a business called Compliance Line, and you have some interesting monikers, Mr. Fantastic, Captain Ethics, or the Ethics Evangelist. Tell me about those. Oh, Captain Culture, that's what it is. How did you get to first Compliance Line, and then how'd you get these cool names?
Well, do you want the long version or the short version? I guess
Whichever you're in the mood for, sir.
So my brother and I always dreamed of running a business together, and we set out on that journey, and we raised some money, and we spent some time trying to find a business in an industry that we could put our talents and gifts to work in. And the ethics and compliance industry just really resonated deeply with us. So we did a deep dive there, and we were so lucky to find Compliance Line. It was at a stage where the founders were ready to move on to do something else, and we were ready to kind of roll our sleeves up and work, 80 hours a week to help build the business. So that's how we came to get involved with Compliance Line. That was about 5 years ago. We moved our families across the country from Chicago to North Carolina. That's why I have that Southern drawl now. And that's why I'm kind of a Southern boy at this point. And we've been running Compliance Line ever since. So it's a company that has a suite of corporate integrity products that range from issue intake and case management, where people can speak up and listen up, to sanction screening and monitoring, and basically compliance and ethics training that doesn't suck. So yeah, that's the business that we're in. And how I got those nicknames are, I don't know, some of them are kind of aspirational. Some of, Mr. Fantastic is a throwback to the comic book character, because I am famously flexible, as I like to say. And and Captain Culture is just, we, in our private equity days, we saw a bunch of different businesses. In our financial services days, we saw a bunch of different transactions and companies that we got intimate with for various periods of time. And we just saw that really the common thread to the best companies were those that had the best culture. And we think culture is the only sustainable competitive advantage in business and probably in life. And that was something that we always wanted to kind of put on the forefront of our approach and strategy to running and building a great company.
Well, that is cool. What is your brother's name?
My brother's name is Giovanni Gallo.
All right. And what are his nicknames?
You'll have to ask him. He may have more nicknames than I do, but he's like our chief, he's like a builder. He really builds people well. He's like our chief development officer. And he is the proud papa. He's, I don't know, we're kind of cut from the same cloth. We have a lot of the same foundations, but a lot of sort of complementary, personalities,
It really is encouraging to see what you're doing, Nick, because, ultimately happiness comes from having a sense of purpose. And it's easy for people to get trapped in jobs or careers where they just kind of feel like they're going through the motions and making a living and wishing for something more profound. And you're able to actually involve yourself in serving others, but serving others in a way that helps them help themselves. And that's really, when we talk about ethics, my approach to ethics is it's all about the awareness and taking responsibility for how our actions impact others. And so, I really admire what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Well, thank you. That's sweet of you to say. We've always been kind of culture first guys, like I told you, and it's kind of interesting, and I'm kind of thankful that we were able to find a company that really can help other larger organizations build their cultures and give people that purpose. And I don't know if it's always been the case. It seems more of the case now, at least it's sort of, closer to the surface, that people are, with labor mobility where it is and work from home and all these different things, it's very easy to change jobs. And the number of people that I speak with that say, it's really less about the money and it's more about having working for a company or working with a company where I feel like my purpose is overlaid with that organizational mission.
Absolutely.
That's sort of like higher than it's ever been, And it's just, it sometimes gives me chills that I get to work in this industry that is such an overlay, to your point, with like what I feel like my own sort of personal purposes, you know?
Well, the rabbi and I were very impressed with your website.
Wow, thank you so much.
Complianceline.com. I think I love the way you're living. You decided you wanted to work with your brother. You looked at your talents. My father once said a long time ago, you can do anything you want because God gives you all these talents, but you have to decide where you can be most helpful. And he said, look at your quirks, look at your strengths, and then you'll know where you can be of service. And I think it sounds like what you did. My father would be impressed.
Well, that's nice to hear that. It's actually an interesting piece of advice, and it's probably right. But it's you know, as you kind of come up through corporate, it's almost like you're getting churned out by this machine where those
Yes.
quirks and those like individualities need to be like pared away or something. And there was a long time where I felt like I need to be less of who I am. And to your point, like I think when you lean into who you actually are,
Yes.
you lean into those strengths. Obviously, you want to build your weaknesses and all that stuff, but really leaning into your strengths, those unique talents, as you put it, are really what are going to separate you and really allow you to have the biggest impact on those around you. You know.
Well, we noticed that you have a lot of emphasis on diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
We had Dr. Helen Turnbull, who is a diversity inclusion expert, on the show, and I think that she would be tickled pink with what you're doing.
Wow.
So tell me about diversity inclusion. What is it that you're doing with culture that has to do with that? Because that's a real important catchphrase these days.
Well, my dad is Cubano. I'm a first generation
Cubano,
American.
yo también.
I know. It's another connection we have here. But so coming over with that minority experience and seeing how a lot of minorities were treated and seeing what my mom had to go through in the 90s being a working mom and all those like lecherous bosses she had to deal with, and even what my wife had to deal with in New York City, and obviously the 2000s and stuff like that. Like we have a lot of broken workplaces, and what I've seen is that a lot of folks have to, it's kind of like we're talking about, you have to be this artificial version of yourself at work, where you have to sort of take your heart out of your chest, you have to take your brain out of your head, you need to be this sort of automaton and color within the lines and all that kind of stuff. And there's pictures that people have, whether explicit or implicit, about what success looks like and what a manager in this kind of a role looks like. And a lot of those things didn't really make a lot of sense to us. So we've always, we've seen always a lot of magic and diversity, and not to sound cliche about it, but I mean, you see a lot of magic and diversity from a finance perspective, right? A diverse portfolio helps you weather the storm better. Well, that is true also from a company perspective. You have a bunch of diverse perspectives in your portfolio of people, where people are actually actualized to be themselves and put their unique gifts to work and bring those quirks to work in pursuit of this organizational mission. There's so much like magic that can come from it. So, we're a company that's run by minorities. We're a company that has women throughout the organization. Most of our managers are women and things like that. And it's not just to like look good on paper. It's because it's kind of a funner way to work. And it feels good to give opportunities for folks who have been working at another company who just kept being told, you're not ready for that promotion, when it's probably because, of their racial background or something, to come here and be unleashed and really thrive. There's genius in all of us. So, again, if we can it's hard to kind of sell diversity and inclusion products, right? Like, I don't know. Imagine showing up at the gym for your workout class, and the workout instructor comes in and he weighs 375 pounds and he's eating a cheeseburger. It's hard to sell diversity and inclusion products if you're not a diverse company yourself. It's hard to sell corporate integrity products if you're not leading with integrity and leading with an ethical organization. So it's kind of one thing that we're talking about, one homogenous sort of spirit that needs to kind of permeate both the organization and the impact that we're trying to have in the world. And we've just seen a ton of value come from the diversity of thought, of personality, of ages, of generations, of racial backgrounds, and so forth that exists within our organization.
Nick, my concern about having you on the program is that because we are so aligned in our thinking, we don't just want this to turn into an echo chamber where we affirm one another. But as I'm listening to you, I was thinking I've said much of the same ideas, articulated them in my own interviews. And one of the questions I get asked again and again is that this makes so much sense. Why don't people get it? I mean, why are we still in business trying to sell culture when it is so obvious that that is the way of success? And I try to come up with an answer, but how would you address that question?
I think it's a great question, and I think ultimately it comes down to fear, right? It's maybe an ego fear, it's a control fear, it's a neuroses fear. I don't know. It's some kind of fear though that's gonna, you don't want someone to, I don't know, to challenge you, or I mean, you've seen this 100 times, right? I think what I'm about to describe is maybe a microcosm or a seed of this broader forest that we're talking about. But you see somebody who's like, man, when I'm a manager, I'm going to do it right, and I'm going to do this and that, and then they get that power, and then they just fall in line with how their manager was, that they hated, that they were speaking out against because of the pressures of dollars over everything, or the pressures of performance. I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, but perhaps it's like when you feel like a caged animal, you fall into this like backup style, and that backup
Yes.
style is not this like actualized, like above the line, sort of like really clean way of acting. And so when you have these pressures on you from external forces or from a boss that's above you, that you feel like your job is on the line, you're sort of falling down into this like base level of like this Maslow like bottom level of like,
Yeah.
this is survival, this means I'm not going to have food and like all those kinds of things. So this like survival instinct comes out, and when you're in that sort of high cortisol mode, it's hard to have the sort of third eye open, metaphorically, to see the magic in other people and give room for that. And also, I think it probably is also compounded by, maybe this is like another sort of flavor of it. It's compounded by this short-term focus that we have, where we expect to, I'm going to plant a seed and tomorrow I'm going to have a crop. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to plant an acorn, tomorrow I'm going to have a tree. That's not how anything grows. It takes a long time to do that. And if we don't have that sort of time budget, then we need to see results immediately. And it takes time for people's baggage to drop, and it takes time to see the magic in people. And sometimes we just don't have time for it, maybe. I don't know.
Well, and I think we have to train people and educate them and then learn together. I think one of the best ways to strip anyone of talent is to expect them to do what everyone else has always done. And
right.
I've seen, one of the cool things I've seen in this time of the COVID is that I've seen some pretty original thinking in managers. Suddenly they have a workforce that's remote, and they're working differently. Maybe at first everyone was working every other day or 2 days a week, and they had to communicate more about how they were going to work. And I think that's been magical for many managers. Didn't know how to do the thinking, but the people under them did. And I've seen much more discussion about what needs to get done, how are we going to get it done, and moving forward. Are you seeing the same thing, that some companies are thriving and some have totally failed that test? Are you
pretty
seeing
interesting.
the same?
Yeah, that's like an interesting way you described that. I've kind of talked about COVID as like the great revealer, and it's gonna it's gonna like reveal, it's gonna reveal what's up underneath the skirt or something. It's gonna reveal like what the bones of the company actually are. And if you're, perhaps, I'm just kind of brainstorming a little bit, but if you're this kind of industrial revolution style command and control company, it's probably hard to thrive in this like great flattener that COVID has become, right? Because you don't have the same controls that you used to have. You can't like walk around and micromanage people if everybody's working in their own houses, right? Like, how do you keep people motivated? Like all the, the sea, the ocean that we're floating on is just undulating so much. Like none of those old plays are kind of working. So maybe that has a piece of the puzzle. But yeah, I think COVID perhaps is the catalyst for it. And I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see a massive separation of organizations that are able to adjust to this new normal, which is not just sort of a COVID work from home sort of physicality thing. It's also a composition of the workforce thing. And I think the hearts and minds of the workforce are at least more activist, in the sense that they're more prone to speak out. They have a different prioritization of values. And in that, call that Gen Z millennial group, that's now 50% of our workforce, that's going to be 75% over the next 5 to 10 years, depending on where you draw those lines. And also the ascension to positions of power by those, weird individuals in this group that I'm talking about is going to have a massive effect on how organizations are organized, how work gets done, the role that ethics, play in the actual like achievement of the company's mission. And I think to your point, like companies that can get ahead of that curve and use that to like weaponize ethics, so to speak, are going to totally separate from those that kind of greenwash it. You know what I mean?
Weaponize ethics. Wow.
That's a book title, maybe, huh?
I think that's a keynote. That's a TED Talk.
That's a TED
Yeah,
Talk.
no,
Okay, I like that. All right.
That's
I
a
like
TED
that.
Talk. Hey, Rabbi, I love your take on ethics and compliance. I could hear you talk about that all the time, and I think it's relevant. If you wouldn't mind ranting on that.
Well, yeah, I did. First, I'd like to actually follow up on something you just said, Nick, which I thought was really interesting. That they've, in this new culture, there has been software developed where I think it was first for teachers to monitor students when they're taking tests by themselves and actually tracking where their eyes go and how long they look away to make sure they're not cheating. And then employers wanted this to check on their employees while they're working. And it's, I mean, aside from being Orwellian, it feels like in many cases counterproductive. I mean,
Totally.
I understand there has to be some sort of a monitoring system, but at the same time, you're creating a culture of distrust.
Totally.
And you're creating anxiety levels. I mean, if I'm taking a test and I want to look up and think for a moment, and I know that the software is going to be making evaluations about my integrity based on these little nuances of behavior, then I'm certainly not going to be doing my best work.
Totally.
And I'm not going to feel any sense of loyalty to this kind of system.
And no creativity.
What was
Correct.
that, Doctor?
And no creativity.
Right. So, we are locked in a bit of a paradox here, that we do need some sort of accountability system, but what we've come up with is something that's actually suppressing productivity.
I love that you brought this up. We were talking to another business leader. We were thinking about maybe doing a deal with this person, and they were talking about this monitoring software on their remote workforce. And I was just like, I retched. Like, I don't know.
I hate that.
If you're going to draw those kinds of lines, then all you're ever going to get from people, like, let's say right here, there's some line in the sand below which you get fired. And so now we can reestablish that line with a work quota in a factory, or we can reestablish that line with the amount of sort of mouse movement on the screen on your dining room table as you work from home. Well, then that's what people are going to solve for. Like, what are they going to solve for? They're going to solve for not getting fired. So you're going to get something slightly above that line. I think, and again, I've been accused throughout my life of being bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, optimist, all that kind of stuff. That's who I am, I guess. But I think it's much better, at least in theory, for people to unleash and give you something way beyond that line. You're never going to get that if they're solving for, mouse movements on a screen, or where are my eyes looking. And frankly, it's pretty easy to go on Reddit or something else and download some software that will move your mouse for you as you go and go get your nails done or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, people will solve for the constraints in the system. I think our challenge as leaders is to put a system in place that, yes, we need to draw clear lines around the field, but also allow for, to Dr. Marguerite's point, also allow for that magic to happen on that field and not be so, you remember those old, there's a lot more magic that can happen on an actual ice rink that has perimeters and has, lines around it than can be had on, remember those old video games in the arcade where it was like that globe and the guys are just on those little lines. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
you know what I'm talking about? Those kind of hockey games, like, that's way more limited, right? And that's what you end up kind of creating in your work system, I think, with tools like that. You know what I mean?
I think so. One of the things that I've been struggling with more with companies is compliance with continuing education. So many companies have in-house requirements, but also some of them have I'm a psychologist, so for my license, for attorneys, social workers, finance people. And one of the big areas of conflict is depending on who is the compliance entity. They have continuing education online points where you can't fast forward. You can't look at the questions first and then solve for the questions. If it takes an hour, it takes an hour, and you can't fast forward it. I think that's terrible. I think many people learn better by looking at the questions and then they solve for those questions. It's a focused reading. I believe you don't have to do drip. You can give it to them all at once and let them figure it out. And it's been interesting as I'm talking with different industry leaders. How do they want to move forward with their conferences or their in-house compliance training? What do you guys do about that? Because I know you're into compliance big time.
You know, I think a lot of our training in general is broken. And I think it comes
Yes.
down to like what people are solving for, right? And like what's important. On some level, if the most important thing is making sure everyone knows this compliance rule, well, you can carve out 4 weeks and people can come 40 hours a week to this training and you're going to just bombard them with this stuff so it really soaks into the brain. I'm obviously illustrating a ridiculous thing that no sort of sane business person is going to do because that's going to be such a big portion of the year and the productivity impact and so forth. So people have tried to solve for this, you know, efficiency, effectiveness, balance in many different ways. And there's a lot of theories around it. And there's a lot of sort of technological limits around it. And then there's this added layer of, okay, here we go. Here's some inside baseball. I'm tearing back the curtain so you can see a little bit of the Oz behind it. There's also a bunch of organizations that have sales teams that are out there selling a product that the owners don't want to make new investments in, right? I'm a private equity firm. I just bought this e-learning company. I don't want to redo all my courses. I don't want to redo my whole learning management software. So guys got to sell what they have. And there's a lot of talk tracks out there to sell kind of antiquated solutions and that try to, you know, have certain benefits, right? Like we're going to minimize seat time or we're going to have the biggest impact or so forth. And people have to sit through the course, right? Like those decisions are some function of a confluence of a number of different factors. So
And
I
yeah,
think,
but I think that I've been hired by some companies to look at their training, the antiquated training, and find a way to fast forward it to more current ways of learning
totally.
and even some group learning
Yeah.
for compliance. And it's been
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, it's probably fun and probably the people like it a lot better. And, you know, to your point, people learn in a lot of different ways. And what I
Yes.
found the biggest lacking in sort of compliance training in general, maybe all training, is like we don't reach across the aisle to the people in marketing to say like, well, how do you guys deliver a message? Well, they deliver it 7 times, 7 ways, right? I say something 7 different ways, 7 times, and that's what I need to do in the marketplace to get my new product to launch or whatever. There's some elements of that we can borrow, and we can have compressed training. They can be TikTok style trainings, right? Like, what's the essence of the thing? What's the principle behind this, you know, this massive regulation that you as a compliance person or an ethics person probably have to know inside and out? With somebody working on a shop room floor or somebody selling in some, some jurisdiction somewhere else in the world, they're not going to know it all inside and out. So what are those core pieces and how can you deliver those in ways that are actually going to be effective? And I think if we can open our minds up to your point, different ways to like deliver that information, you can probably achieve more effectiveness and more efficiency.
Well, that flexibility and that creativity gives me an opportunity to circle back to the question you asked earlier, Doctor, which is the interplay between compliance and ethics and the historical model that I go back to again and again. Not quite 2,000 years ago, the Second Temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, and the sages investigated in their own minds what was the spiritual root of this calamity, and why did the people deserve to have their temple destroyed and have their capital razed and be sent into exile. And one of the reasons they identified is because the people were not going beyond the letter of the law. In other words, they were in compliance. And it's so striking to me that of all the sins it's possible to commit, this doesn't sound like it's anywhere near the top of the list.
It's not so much fun.
Not so much fun, but there are lots worse things. Maybe. But what it really means is that the people were using the law to subvert the law.
Right.
They were saying, I've checked the boxes. I'm in compliance. I did what I had to do. Now I'm off duty.
Right.
And it's a toxic mindset. And
it is.
We need compliance laws and we need compliance rules. We need standards and structure, but we also need the attitude that that's just where it starts. I like to say that ethics begins where compliance ends.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
like
strike a
it's like
balance.
it's like compliance are the bricks and ethics are like the mortar, or compliance is like the letter of the law and ethics are like the spirit of the law, or the application beyond what's been articulated in the words on the page or something.
Exactly. Or compliance is the house, and ethics is the furniture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, that's
everyone
pretty interesting.
has, and when people are all stressed out with all these changes, I've seen some companies go way back to just minimal compliance.
Mm,
And that's a great way to go backwards in their culture. They're afraid to try new things. And
right.
my solution is to find out other people's solutions first. Ask, so what would you do then? You go to a company, they've been scared, so they've retreated, and they're nailing compliance. They've got it. But what do you do then? That's not enough. So what's the
Right.
next step?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And again, it's almost like a hierarchy of values, right? Like, can I grow? Like, what's the safest thing, right? The safest thing is to like never leave your house. But obviously, you do that, you don't experience the world and so forth. So how can I experience the world and grow and build something while also sort of staying as reasonably safe as possible? Maybe that's it. Maybe it's a question of materiality or reasonableness in pursuit of something, something that's more primary. I don't know. It's a tough question though, because how do you? Because it's like a moving, living thing. We're talking about like the amalgamation of all the values within this sort of theoretical company or whatever we're talking about, or whatever institution we're talking about. Those values are not just the words on the wall. It's really the gap between those words on the wall and the conglomeration of everyone's internal values and actual activities and so forth in pursuit of that mission. So it's just always moving. You know what I mean?
One of the
This is what you
images that,
said.
oops, go ahead, Rabbi.
I'm sorry. It's what you said earlier about the physical trainer who's in terrible health and has terrible eating habits. He's sabotaging his own career because he
Yeah,
doesn't have the
right.
credibility to do what he claims he's going to do.
Right. So
Exactly
one of
right.
the
Yeah.
strongest images I had when I first came to this country is our neighbors took us to the zoo, and there was a circus. And so they were kind of like, there was a petting zoo and then a circus. So we peeked into the circus. We didn't go there. But I had this amazing image because I felt doing that high wire walk. I left a country and a language, wasn't really part of the new country or language or culture. And I felt like I was in the middle, that I had no safety. My safety, and so the metaphor I've come to is that it's that, how with the high wire, there's these little places, little stands where they can hurry up and go and take a break and then do the next one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you call those, but the little safety stop places. And I think
that's what they're called. Yeah.
I'm sure there's a very technical term, the safety stop places.
Buckets, I think they call them buckets.
The buckets, all right, so they get into the bucket. Although when I was a kid, they weren't buckets, it was a flat platform. And it looked pretty rickety, it looked like my treehouse. So going to then, to me then, with the rabbi talking, compliance is that safety platform. And the problem is that I see people need to have an excitement about going to the next level, that next bit of, take that risk, risking greatness in order to get the next compliance. The problem is then people say, well, we've hit compliance, we're done. But I've seen very smart leaders creating a new kind of compliance with a corporate culture that's stimulating and exciting and pushes people to contribute to their maximum ability. I've even seen schools doing that. They ask the students what's working, what not working. How would you like it to be? So they're asking all the stakeholders for that vision for that next high wire walk. And I think that's how I see the rabbi's relationship between compliance and ethics. But you have to have something exciting to look forward to, or no one's going to risk.
Yeah,
we don't
right.
move out of fear.
Mm-mm.
We go backwards out of fear, not forward.
That's right. That's right.
Which is what you were saying earlier, Nick, that so much of the unwillingness to embrace the culture that's going to help us succeed comes from fear.
Totally. I think that's totally right. I'm just kind of struck by that image of, walking across the tightrope to the next thing, and what's going to make us want to take that plunge, so to speak. Well, plunge is probably the wrong word with the tightrope analogy, but to go for it, as you were kind of talking about that, there's this book that the guy who runs Netflix put out, I think maybe a year or so ago, and it talks about the culture. What's that?
Mark Randolph, I think.
Yeah, it might be. And I never remember who writes books, so but he was talking about the culture that they built, and I think it's Reed Hastings maybe, and he was talking about, what, we got to boil all this down. This code of conduct can really be boiled down to one sentence. Is like, always do what's in the best interest of Netflix. And so if you're doing something that's, perhaps slightly out of compliance or beyond some rule that's been clearly articulated, well, if you can point back and make a credible case for what you were doing, was in fact in the best interest of the organization, that kind of allowed for both the coloring within the lines, kind of coloring, painting on the canvas, so to speak, but without feeling like you have to just paint by numbers. You know what I mean? Allow for that creativity that the doctor was talking about, and allow for some of that risk taking that really has allowed this organization to, move to the next level.
I put a video by Reed Hastings in the chat for you. I think it addresses what you were talking about. Well, it sounds like you and your brother are doing a really good job of that. You're helping people. You're the Sherpa. Maybe you're the Sherpa to the next step, right?
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. We'll kind of see. It's like that old Zen thing, that old Zen saying of, we'll kind of see at the end of the day if that was the right decision or we're doing a good job. Like, the impact should end up speaking for itself. If we can build a great company that people look back on in fondness, that our clients at the end of the day are happy with the service that we're providing, then that's great. We've just always tried to be, to your point, we've tried to be Sherpas. Like, we're climbing this mountain of risk. We have insights that might help folks, but we're not the star of the show. Our clients are the stars, and they're the ones who are, the arbiters of their own workforce, and they're the ones who are trying to, create workplaces that are better, that unlock the magic of the people that come there every day. And if we can help them up that mountain, then I think we're doing our job.
I think your lack of ego will serve your clients well.
Well, thank you. Thank you so
think
much.
that's
You pick that word risk because on the one hand, we want to avoid risk.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, there has to be an element of risk. Otherwise, we're not pushing ourselves to the next level.
That's right.
And unfortunately, some people are naturally more risk averse. And then the people who are under them, they would do well to have that are not risk averse, so that you have a balance.
Yeah,
and when
but then
we're hiring for diversity, that's one of the factors we need to look at.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think in a sort of a natural hierarchy, there's some natural emulation of your leader and the values that they espouse. And so if you have a highly risk averse leader who's not like actualized and sees the potential complementarity, sometimes that quote unquote risky behavior can get stamped out pretty quickly, when that might be what they need to really balance them out and push beyond a level. So it's really a hard thing to navigate, and there's no silver bullet solution other than, I think, having an eye toward your own weakness, having an eye toward minimizing your ego, recognizing that we're all not perfect, and that part of the whole magic of 1 + 1 = 3 or 5 or something more than 2 is that synergy that can come from other folks who can fill in our own gaps. You know what I mean?
Of course, that's the secret of great partnership, is when you have people who have different strengths, different perspectives. And what I like to say is that diversity is, again, not about checking boxes. It's about creating a representation of different viewpoints that are respectful of one another, while constantly looking for common ground, looking for, as you say, what's best for all of us together in a way that doesn't sacrifice individuals along the way.
Well put.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I
Well
don't know.
put.
It's so interesting that it's so hard. Like, it's so apparent and basic, but like our egos get in the way, and I'm sure we can fall into a psychology rabbit hole kind of talking about that. But it's so crippling to our organizations, like this fear fuel that like plagues our workplaces. creates anxiety in folks. It, stifles them. They're like a bunch of potted plants that are kept in a closet that don't get any sunlight. And then they bring that energy back home, and then their kids absorb it and it goes into their communities. I mean, it's like our kind of motto is to make the world a better workplace. And it sounds trite sometimes, but it's like, if we can make workplaces better, that has such multiplicative effects. If somebody can be
Yes.
unleashed, if the magic in them can be unleashed and they love the work that they're doing and they feel valued and they feel heard, that has so many knock-on effects that bring, again, make our child's lives better and make our children's lives better and our communities better and all that kind of stuff. So it's all connected. You know what I mean?
Well, as long as you raise that Nick, you have a really lovely story on your website about an incident between your daughter and her teacher. Could you share that story with us?
Yeah, it was, I'm so proud of her. Like, she is this little lion. Like, if you saw her, you'd be like, oh, how cute and little dainty she is. She has like the spirit of a lion in her. And
She's
she's
beautiful.
been that
I saw
way.
her. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm just so proud of her. She's like, she always speaks up. She'll always stand up for, she's done it for her whole life. It's really crazy. But the long story short is, she had an African-American teacher who she loved, she was very close with. And we live in the South, and there's some backwards thinking down here still, for sure. Not everywhere by any means, but you'll see it from time to time. And this little girl in her class went up to this teacher and she said, she told her that, I don't like you, your skin is gross, you're black, I don't like your black skin, all this stuff. And my daughter ran up to her and she said, you don't say that to Miss, she has the same name as my daughter, Miss Val. She says, you don't say that to Miss Val. Miss Val is beautiful, and blah, blah, blah. And it had such an impact on this teacher. This teacher told my wife the story with tears streaming down her face, because, she saw somebody speak up on her behalf, this little girl who was, 4 or 5 years old. So it's, I'm very proud of that story. I'm very proud of the way my wife is raising her and the way, she's kind of turning out. And it's very early in the game, of course, but yeah, just to, that courage, like, it was wrong and she was going to say that it was wrong and she wasn't going to let that stand. And I mean, I can go on and on about it, but it was like such a proud moment for me,
Well, and I'm sure that your daughter is proud of you and her mother as well.
Oh, thank you.
The power of the story is that, children that age, they don't simply become this way by themselves.
Yeah.
They're absorbing, for better and for worse, what they're exposed to. And on some level, we are always children. And as you've said, in a work environment, we will absorb the culture around us.
Great point.
And problems become self-perpetuating, which means that solutions can become self-perpetuating also, if there's the will to implement them.
Yeah, there's those knock-on effects. And, to your point about children, like, I've never seen two babies in daycare, like, be racist to each other. They learn that. And like this little girl who was being mean to this teacher, she didn't just come up with that on her own. Right. She heard that at home, or she heard that from her grandfather, or whatever. So you're right. It's all contagious.
Or a TV show.
Yeah, right. I don't know what she was watching, maybe some old sitcoms or something. But it's all contagious, and it can all, to your point, bleed on to other things. And nothing grows in like a linear fashion. Like, if you watch a plant grow, it doesn't grow the same amount every day. It bursts through the soil and it starts growing really fast, and then you see the leaves unfurl and so forth. And that's the potential of what you're talking about in terms of us all being children. If you can unleash a little bit of that in your workforce, if you can unleash a little bit of that magic, it can start to like really just, it can kind of catch fire in a good way,
And you don't make a plant grow. There was a story in China a few years ago that watermelons in the field started exploding because it was a cash crop and they were trying to get them to grow faster.
Oh.
So they gave them steroids.
Interesting.
And literally watermelons blowing up, exploding in the fields. You can't make something grow. What do? You create an environment that is conducive, and then we naturally grow by ourselves. And
what a great story. There's so many lessons in that story. That's crazy. That's a crazy story. Yeah, you can't force it. It has to naturally happen. And you the best you can do is create the circumstances for it to happen, and then just let it happen. Right.
Yeah. That's what culture is all about. That's why we're here.
The exciting part about that, and just like many of the COVID learning stories, is I see many exciting leaders asking themselves, why didn't this work? What do we need now? What do you think? I see a lot of people, because of their fear, or they let their fear catapult them to curiosity, to listening more, to asking more questions. And I think fear and anxiety can be great catalysts on the path to growth if we use it as gifts.
Well, yeah. And I think to that point, I read this, and if it's not true, I'm going to keep saying it because it feels like it's true. That like the chemical reactions going on in your body when you're anxious for something or you're excited for something are the same. It's really about how we're framing it. So if you're nervous before a speech, you can just reframe that as being excited for that speech. And if you can reframe this anxiety as something that, hey, there's something I don't understand, I can change this anxiety and fear into curiosity, to your point, then you can uncover some things that you didn't see before versus just kind of burrowing deeper into the habits that you've already established, you know?
Yeah, these are exciting times to be sure. And I think
Yeah.
you and your brother are certainly doing your share to help the world get to a better place. I think it's very exciting.
Thank you. Do you think these are more exciting times than in the past, or do you feel like
I do?
you do?
I do.
You think things
I
are
think
just
it's an
moving
interesting,
faster?
I think it's an opportunity for us as a society to look at the workforce.
Mhm.
Does everyone work better in the workplace? Who works better at home? In what combination? How do we lead different kinds of people in different industries for different tasks? I think it's an exciting time of explosion, a renaissance of learning and growing.
Yeah, it might be.
That's how I
I
see
think you
it.
might be right. It's like this crazy inflection point. It's like we're moving from this industrial age. There's this like generational shift happening. We have this work from home catalyst. It
And
feels like,
school from home. How many of us became reluctant homeschoolers?
yeah, that was thrust on a lot of folks. But again,
That
to your
was
point,
that was
15
rough.
years
Yeah.
from now, who knows what our world's going to look like? I think you're right, though. It's going to look way different.
Well, it's
Yeah.
the speed of change that's really changed. I mean, everything keeps accelerating, and the challenge is for us to keep up with it. And
Right.
that's not simple.
No, and anticipate where it might go so that we can sometimes do more than keep up and use the trajectory to kind of create a future and then ask ourselves, how did we get there?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it's
go
an
ahead.
exercise that I have a lot of people do. What does the future look like now? How'd you get there? Rather than feeling backwards all the time, gives us a little more excitement about the possibilities. So what were you saying, Nick?
Oh, I was just going to say, like, if you're a surfer and you want to go surfing one day, you may know that like the waves are going to be good that day, but you don't know which wave you're going to surf. You don't know how that's going to actually move. Like, you'll have a general sense of how surfing works, of course, but you just kind of take it as it comes, and you're just going to go and kind of ride those waves. And you never hear a surfer talking about like, oh, I didn't ride the wave I thought I was going to ride. You just get the next wave, or you make the
That's
whatever
right.
adjustments, you know, like there's a certain fluidity to it that sort of naturally comes when you're interacting with nature. And I think we get this maybe illusion that because it's business and because there's these sort of structures and lattices and, you know, technology and rules and all this stuff, that it's not this sort of force of nature. But if we can borrow from some of that maybe surfer mentality, it'll help us navigate through it and kind of take it as it comes a little bit better, maybe.
Well, like you, Mr. Fantastic. I mean, I think we can borrow different superhero powers
Right.
depending on what we need, whether it's flexibility or ability to create heat, which is excitement and catalysts, you know,
Yes.
whatever, right? So, Rabbi, is it time for the word of the day?
Word of the day, my favorite part of the show.
Well, you know, it's becoming my favorite part of the show because it feels like there's a certain divine inspiration that comes here. I try to pick a word that has some resonance with our guests, but you know, it's remarkable how often the conversation tees up the word of the day, which today is insouciant. Insouciant. And it means free from concern, worry, or anxiety. And that sounds like a good thing. We don't want to worry too much or be overly concerned or anxious. But at the same time, it also means carefree and nonchalant. And that's not necessarily such a good thing, because it is important for us to take life seriously. You know, we say, don't be so serious. But you have to be a little bit serious because life is serious business. And so what we've been talking about really all the way through is striking this balance. And you know, you really set this up so well for me, Nick, with your comment about anxiety. If we can take anxiety and transmute it into excitement. If we can take the potentially caustic emotions that we're all subject to and reframe them and rechannel them and direct them in a way that's positive, one effect is that we don't create this impossible ideal that life is just supposed to be bliss and comfortable and full of joy. You know, we all want to be happy, but we never define what happiness is or where it comes from. And if we don't have some tension in our lives, if we don't have struggle, then we're not going to feel we're making progress. We're not going to feel we're accomplishing anything. We're not going to feel that we're growing at all. And so it's that balance. What's the right level of tension? Keep it at tension. Don't let it become anxiety. Don't be too serious, but be serious. Don't become cavalier. This is really the challenge of leading a good life, which is so much a part of being an ethical life. And starting with a foundation of compliance that allows us to grow and to strive and to really create wonderful things with our lives and with our cultures.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's okay to be a little insouciant. You got to be a little insouciant, yeah, right? But don't go too crazy with it. But you know, I think something that struck me, and I kind of say this a lot of us go through life as if we're like performing brain surgery, and that has no room for error, right? You're doing brain surgery, you mess one thing up, the person's a vegetable. Life is a lot more like baseball than it is like brain surgery. Baseball, you can strike out 2 out of 3 times and you can still wind up in the Hall of Fame. So just recognizing that as you're kind of crossing that tightrope from bucket to bucket, or whatever you called it, safe platform to safe platform, there's probably a safety net underneath it, and you falling off of it, it's not everyone's going to leave the circus in a huff. It's probably going to be fine, and you'll get back up and you can climb it again. That allows us to take a little bit more risk and recognize that life is not binary. It's there's a lot of gray. Maybe you want to write a book about the gray there, Doctor or Rabbi. But
grappling with the gray.
Grappling with the gray. But I mean, in actuality, it's not this binary thing. It's all this gray, and there's all this room for error, and we're not automatons. And trying something new and striking out here or there is what allows us to hit that next level of pitch. You know what I mean?
Well, that is without any prompting from me, Nick, that was a great final message for us. So thank you for that. And thank you for your time and your wisdom. It was a pleasure. We look forward to the next time you can join us. And Doctor, what's the last word?
Well, before the second to the last word, the penultimate is, I think we have chosen our guest well. I am excited about what you and your brother have done, Nick. We have with us Nick Gallo, and he's complianceline.com. And I guess the question is, what are you doing with this unusual and unprecedented opportunity to use ethics as your jumping off point for greatness? What are you doing to leverage the power of ethics to become all that you never thought you could be, but can be? And if you can imagine it, you can reach it. But more importantly, if someone around you can imagine it, you can certainly go farther than with just one person working on the future. So that is my thought to end there. And I wish everyone a wonderful holiday, and welcome to the Rabbi and the Shrink. We're going to be putting it on our YouTube channels. If you have questions, please send them to podcast@therabbiandtheshrink.com. And Nick, you can reach him most at complianceline.com. Nick, thanks again for joining us. It was fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Say hi to your brother and tell him hi for us, okay?
I will, absolutely will.
And your daughter, let her know how proud we are of her.
I will. I will be talking about this all night. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.